To start, and lots of seats up here in the front, just like church. You know, come on up the front. There's no choir, so you don't have to worry. I don't know where those seats at the back. How did they ever get set out there? Okay, gotta be careful. You know, there's a dart board right above you. Okay. Anyway. Well, thank you. Welcome. As I said when I came up the stairs this evening, I turned right and there was a woman at the door, and she said, "You're in the right spot." And I said, "Yes, usually when I come into this room I get fed." She says, "Well, not tonight. Not tonight." My name is Horace Carver, and I want to welcome you to this public meeting being held here tonight respecting the Lands Protection Act. Some of you have attended these meetings before, and some of you are new. And I have a little format that I go through. I hope that you have received this little packet. If you haven't, just raise your hand. I'll make sure that you receive one. It's a little bit of a takeaway. The Lands Protection Act was enacted in 1982. The history of land in this province, as most of you know, has a very long history in which there's been always a fair bit of interest, a lot of pride, and on occasion some controversy. And in the 1800s, a significant amount of time and attention and money was devoted to the matter of absentee British landlords. And it affected many families and generations for a period of time. And then after the land was bought back by the government, people were able to get their deeds. Some people, like my great-great-grandfather, farmer basically all of his life. He was a tenant farmer for over 50-plus years before he was able to get a deed. He was one of the last people in that area to get a deed. He was a tenant farmer and paid rent for over half of his life. And I have been interested, as I've journeyed across the province, to hear everyone's stories about land. Now, when the minister and the executive council appointed me to this position, and I should say that they advertised for it and I applied for it. But after I was appointed, there was a reception at Province House. Dr. David Suzuki was there, and there were several hundred people at this particular reception. And people were coming up to me and making comments and so forth. My wife was with me. And at one point in time, I had various clusters of people around me, and I was just listening and so forth. And after the event was over, and as we walked down the street, my wife said, "Horace, appears to be a lot of interest in this Land Act." And I said, "That's true." And she says, "Just listening tonight," she said, "I'm not sure everyone agrees with each other." I said, "That's also true." In any event, at some point in time in our history, there was a law passed that said if you were an alien or foreigner of Canada, you could only own 200 acres of land. And then various changes happened. In the 50s and 60s, at another point in time, that was changed, that if you were an alien or a foreigner of Canada, that it was 10 acres of land and you need the executive council approval. And then in the early 70s, in the Campbell days, they decided to look at non-residents of Prince Edward Island, and it was 10 acres of land or 330 feet, 5 chains of water. You had to get approval from executive council if you wanted to own more than that. And then they got into the whole area of corporations. And the government of which I was proud to be a member, Angus MacLean, who represented this constituency from 1968 and won even during Trudamania, until a few of us convinced this wise person to come back from Ottawa in '76. He was your member of Parliament. And he was very deeply concerned about the land. And because the environment, and some of the people in the room here tonight know those circumstances, a legislative committee was established. It was headed up by Gordy Lank, and there were members from both sides of the House. There were hearings held, and they brought forth 18 recommendations. And those recommendations did many things. The two chief were these. One was that for the first time ever, restrictions applied to individuals in this province. Residents of this province had limits imposed upon them, and that was 1,000 acres per person. And if you had young children below the age of majority or 18, they were counted as part of your holdings. Regards corporations, you could have a corporation of 3 equal shareholders, and the max was 3,000 acres. At that time, there was concern about vertical integration and processing and so forth, and the act was passed. I wasn't a member of the Legislative Committee, but Premier McLean asked me to be in charge of seeing that the bill got drafted and it got put through the House, which I did. And then there were various regulations enacted as well. In those early times, there were less restrictions on farmers in regards reporting, in regards to if you were a farm corporation, you didn't even have to apply for executive council approval. I left public life. My constituents felt it was time for me to practice law full-time. So I returned to that occupation in 1986. It was a split decision. There were only 184 opinion fully in support of that. But in any event, shortly thereafter, there were more amendments made, and over time, various things happened. There was a Supreme Court of Prince Edward Island case in the late 80s that basically said, when it came to leases, the Act is written in such a way that it doesn't talk about ownership, but it talks about interest in the land holding. I.e., if you have an interest in land, it could be by a lease, it could be as a co-owner, that gives you a benefit to the land, and as such is taken into calculation of your land holdings. But there was a court case in the late 80s, and the Court of Appeal said that if you lease in land, that's counted, and if you lease out land, you can deduct it. Okay? About 7 to 8 years, 10 years later, the government of the day said no. Leasing in land is counted, but leasing out land is not able to be deducted. And that is what has become known as double counting. And we've heard about that as we've traveled the province in this particular regard. Now, just go back, if I might, for a very brief. I know I'm taking up a couple of moments, but I'm trying to also provide a bit of an overview of what's gone on. Is that in 1980, when Prime Minister Trudeau decided to bring the Constitution home, he just didn't bring it home. He put in it a Charter of Rights and Freedom. And one of the things he wanted put in it was the right to own property anywhere in Canada. And Premier McLean's government, of which I was a member, strongly opposed that. There became a spontaneous debate in Ottawa at the nationally televised First Ministers' Conference, and the Prime Minister and I got into quite a fight and debate over that. And in a year and a half after that, or a little over a year after that, the Constitution did come home with agreement of all the provinces except Quebec, and that particular provision that we were so opposed to was deleted. Now, I know there are some people, maybe some in this room, who regret that Prince Edward Island was successful in that. But if we hadn't been successful, folks, there'd be no Lands Protection Act, there would be no authority in Charlottetown to make laws that pertain to real property in this particular province of that particular nature. Over the years, there have been a few other bodies have made some comments about the Lands Protection Act, but there hasn't been such a thorough examination as what's happening right now. And in the handout, I'm just going to read to you what the terms of reference are. So in the terms of reference, number 1, supposed to look into and examine regarding the adequacy of existing aggregate land holding limits given changes in agricultural provincial land use and ownership trends in rural communities. 2, options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. Legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as land holding limits as they apply to utilities, application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners, and the information and deeming requirements for non-profit corporations. And 4, any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. If you read down further, they gave me the power to have this commission be as if it's under the Public Inquiries Act, not be as if, it is. And so, you know, we could fill all these empty chairs tonight. It's just sort of like, you know, when they call for a jury. If you're short of jury members, you just call the local sheriff and go out into the street and bring them all in. You know, I could make a list of people and say, hey, go after this fellow. I want to see all his records and do everything like this. You could have the briefs presented in advance, written briefs and everything. That hasn't been my style. Just because you have power doesn't mean you have to use it. My desire has been to provide some education, to hear as best I can from Islanders, all walks of life. That's why we have gone across this province from Alberton down to where my late mother came from, Murray Harbour. 14, they'll actually be 15 before it's all through. And I hope that no one can say that they have been without an opportunity to make the point of view. I am getting unbelievable number of emails. Here's some cards, submissions. If I had any doubt about this issue, if I had any doubt that there was a high interest in land in Prince Edward Island, and I didn't need to be convinced of that, these meetings have done it. I tried to come early. Charlottetown, I was there at 6:15. The meeting went from 7 o'clock to 10. We even had a group of 10 or 12 women sing to us songs pertaining to the earth. It was a fabulous encounter. We had Marion Reid give a presentation on the Lucy Maud Montgomery Trust. I walked out of the hotel at 20 to 11 because people were still talking with me. Okay? So I've done enough talking, and if you look at page 2, it'll show you what the purpose of the Act was in 1998. It sets out some, and I'm going to, normally I read it, but now I think it's time for me to be quiet and listen to you. And then there's some maps there, and we'll see how the evening goes. You can have a look at those, and some other statistics and so forth. So anyway, please, I think there may be 1 or 2 people that have indicated to me they're going to make a little presentation. That would be wonderful, and hear from them, and then others can comment about what's been said or make some comments themselves. Everything has been recorded and be made available. This is my assistant, Patrick Carroll. Although he's a government employee, I have seconded him exclusively to my domain, and he may get his check from the provincial government, but he takes all instructions from me. All right. Nice to see members of the legislature here. I think that's is very indicative of individuals who are interested in affairs of our province. We've had, so far, I guess maybe a total of 6, including tonight, and so that's good. So anyway, Aubrey Bell, you were one of the first people to come. You were one of the first people, have a seat. You were one of the first people to contact me by email, and I think you were the second person in the door tonight, and so we're going to give you the opportunity to be the first one to say something.
Well, thank you so much. Mr. Commissioner and everyone here this evening, my name is Aubrey Bell, and together with my wife, Patricia Bennett from Summerside, we operate Gallery 18 in New London. Now, Gallery 18 is an art gallery and an antique shop, and it's really the largest of its kind on the island. Gallery 18 relies heavily on the tourism market for its success. So to the extent that tourism thrives, then so does Gallery 18. So what's any of that got to do with lands protection? Well, exit surveys of visitors to Prince Edward Island consistently indicate that the number one attraction of Prince Edward Island, at least as far as visitors are concerned, are the vistas. The preservation of island vistas, then, is key to the health of island tourism. However, those vistas are facing some pressure. Industrial wind turbine operations already punctuate the west end of the island. The east end of the island seems eager to play catch-up. And all of this is happening in the absence of any serious discussion about the impact of these big machines on local tourism. Now, surveys in other jurisdictions, such as Scotland, where they have a great many wind turbines, indicate that even the proponents of wind energy generation concede a negative impact on local tourism of 5 to 10%. So what would that mean in PEI? The value of tourism to the island economy is estimated to be, well, close to $400 million a year. So if the negative impact contemplated elsewhere came to be true here on Prince Edward Island, then tourism could be facing a hit of $20 to $40 million in lost revenue a year. Now, for an industry that is already struggling, such a loss would represent a serious blow. However, as I say, there has been no serious discussion about the impact of industrial wind generation on local tourism. Now, living in New London, which is the central part of the island and close to Cavendish, I firmly believe that Cavendish and the North Shore are really the heart of the island's tourism industry. And everything needs to be done to preserve the vistas within this region, because this region is vital to the overall health of the PEI tourism industry. When we talk about vistas, we're really talking about pastoral landscape. The preservation of pastoral landscape depends on the ongoing health of the agricultural sector. Now, I am aware of the debate over limits on land ownership. However, there is much evidence to indicate that island agriculture is facing growing competition from producers on the mainland. The average size of a farm on PEI is much smaller than it is on the mainland. As a result, island agricultural producers often find themselves at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to their counterparts in other parts of Canada. If farm size can be adjusted to improve the ability of island producers to improve their own economy of scale, thus preserving agricultural vistas, then such adjustments demand serious consideration, in my opinion. The size of an agricultural operation on PEI, so far as I am concerned as a tourism operator, is less important than the ongoing maintenance of pastoral landscapes. Now, another issue of less concern is something I call urban crawl. Increasingly, the rural landscape is being dotted with residential development. These new neighbors in rural areas are welcome, of course, but I wonder if island vistas might be better served if the residential expansion into rural areas were managed in a more obvious fashion. So, in conclusion, I will say that I do not envy you, Mr. Commissioner, your task. On an island where the refrain is often heard, "It's my land and I can do what I want with it," you face considerable challenges, balancing any number of competing interests. So, good luck, sir. Thank you.
I appreciate the good luck. Before you go, maybe we can have a little bit of good luck and a little bit of reasonable expectations. With two go together, be a little bit. The supporting the adjustments upward for land limits, Aubrey. Do you have any specific thoughts there?
No, I haven't given any of that any consideration. I think it's pretty basic economics. You have an economy of scale, and it would seem to me, from what I've been reading, that the average size of farms on the mainland is growing, and they are growing here on the island as well, but they still lag well behind. So I can't. I'm not a farmer, but I can't see how the farming, or most farmers, are able to compete as successfully as they could if they had larger farms. They could spread their costs over a wider acreage, you know.
And you mentioned urban crawl and to be managed. What were your thoughts there, a little bit more specific?
Well, we have no, so much of the island is unincorporated, and there basically are no rules. And so long as your neighbors are sensible in unincorporated areas of the island, everything goes along quite nicely, but sometimes that's not always the case.
It's in some ways ironic that we are in this Kensington Legion named after Colonel Johnson, who was a leader and founder of the Rural Beautification Society. And I was the vice president of that organization for 6 or 7 years, and I was the president for half a dozen. And at the Adept Council breakfast, there were about 100 people paid $10 to come here and speak. You didn't pay $10 tonight. I don't know how breakfast was, but I didn't have any. But someone asked me if I thought that the matter of island landscape would have anything to do in my report. And I said, well, the interesting thing is in number 4, any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. And so I tipped my hand a little bit and I said, I can guarantee you that item 4 will include the word landscape. So how we deal with some of that is yet to be determined, but I appreciate very much your interest, and thank you, Aubrey.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Somebody else who has perhaps prepared a little bit of something and want to make sure that you're heard early. Do you have anything that, like Aubrey, that you'd like to read from, or some notes? I'm just trying to do that part of the evening first, and before we get to any other comments. Okay. If you find the in your few comments in your jacket or whatever, we'll hear from them later. But I really would welcome people to come forth and make some comments. It's your choice whether you sit down, it's your choice the mic, and so forth. This many people didn't come out to the meeting of the Kensington Legion to listen to me. Yes.
Urban crawl. Is there not regulations in place from within certain city limits that you're not allowed to subdivide certain parcels?
Well, we do have, I think it was in 1995 when amalgamations took place around Charlottetown, Cornwall, Stratford, and probably up around Summerside area as well, that for so many miles beyond that, it was of a limited nature if subdivisions take place. And so,
I think if I remember correctly, you're only allowed to sell one parcel, one lot off a parcel, off a property number.
well, since the Carver Farm, of which I don't own any land, and I own no shares in any company that owns land, was in Hazelbrook, and fell right in the midst of that. And when my dad got elderly, still alive at 94, but when it came time to dispose of some of the Carver land, became quite aware with the special planning provisions, and he was allowed one residential lot off. He was allowed one industrial lot off. He was allowed one small craft business off. He was allowed more lots off if one of the 5 sons wanted to build on it and get a building permit within 6 months, but I was the only one in Prince Edward Island, and I didn't want to leave where I was, and my brothers out west didn't want to come home, so he was technically down to potential 3 lots off beside the main parcel. As it turned out, He sold one lot for residential and the other was a bit of a light industrial he sold, and then he had to sell the balance of the land to as a block, notwithstanding the fact that across the secondary road there were 10 or 12 homes that already existed and approved lots and had been much earlier. So that's the best that I can provide information on, but there are restrictions. It's gone from, in the past number of years, of people thinking that that special planning should be spread from one tip of the province to the other, to where some people think that those restrictions in those areas should be lifted.
Well, I think it's limiting the person that owns that property to what they can do with it. I mean, yes, they can sell the whole property, and then whoever buys it can apply to IRAC to get it changed zoning-wise. But I mean, that's not really helping the farmer any. That's his retirement. That's his property. Like, so I think there is pretty well urban crawl management going on already, and has been for quite a few years. Just in the surrounding area of Summerside, I know there's been a lot of people apply for subdivisions, and they will not even look at them within that certain mileage. So, I mean, that's, and like you say, I think that's pretty understandable across the province and other communities also.
Thank you. Somebody else? Like, I know there are comments there. I can feel the comments. And in some ways, folks, it's a little harder to get them if you have a larger crowd. Sometimes what we've done, we've sort of had a little bit of a much smaller group, and we've had larger groups. But sometimes if it's smaller, then I can almost pick on people and so forth and get comments out of them. Okay? It's a little harder to pick on people here tonight. Good day, sir. Distinguished farmer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm that age whereby I'll sit down when I can.
Urban Lachlan.
My name is Urban Lachlan.
Would you like to have a seat?
Yes, I'm an urban person. I'm a rural person, but my name is Urban.
You have a seat.
Quite often, Mr. Chairman, I go to a meeting. I usually have an empty seat alongside of me because I have been known to speak my mind, I guess, for quite many years. And Roy Atkinson, who's now 89, the founding president of NFU, he said, always look at the donut and not the hole. And Claire MacDonald, Sherbrooke, and myself, and the late Kathleen Decker were finalists in debating in 1951 for the province. We tied for first place, but they gave it to the other team because they're in the finals the year before. The second year, we're the debating champions for the province. Back in 1957, 5 years later, Gareth Coffin and myself, they wanted me to go on. And I was the leader of the team, and Terry took us on. We're just going through the motions, but the time they got to the rebuttal, they never did catch up. So it was on the farm broadcast. It was judged in the Shediac Inn, which was dismantled 3 or 4 years ago. Now, I have present tonight that Rand Lafleck is here. I succeeded him in 1982, the second time around as district director for Prince Edward Island. I was district director from 1970 to 1977, 1982 to 1992, in 1994 to 1998, 21 years out of 27, and the national board for 1 year in there, too, in between. So minds are like parachutes. They only function when they're open. In the debating, we learned many years ago that there's two sides to most stories. Now, I'm not here to sell the National Farmers Union, but I can say the statement of purpose hasn't changed since 1969. It's a tribute to the people who founded it, paid their own way from Alfred and I forth from Nova Scotia. And that hasn't changed. We're the only farm organization that was chartered by the Government of Canada on June 11th, 1970. With respect to land, I've milked cows for 50 years. And probably you noticed the cartoon, yesterday's journal, where the 3 bulls are lined up outside of Three Oaks. Now we got teachers teaching people anti-bullying. Well, it seems to me the bull is taken as a male gender the last time I looked. And it seems to me the word bullying is a discredit to the male gender. And we're not here to talk about that tonight, but I'm getting there. So anyway, he decided he's going to put in a cartoon. That's how it landed in yesterday. So he scored the goal, and I got an assist, but it's not mentioned. But so we have to be very careful, because what you say in a debate can be used against you. So mindful of that, I hear tell of, I met this person a while ago and talking about competition from other provinces who need more land. Well, I know that people, potato farmers here especially, forgotten more than I'll ever know, but at the same time, seems to me you have to get your cost of production. Now, I just heard tell in the news that they're going to charge another $32, I think, for insurance, because it costs that much more to insurance companies now for the accidents that they have to cover, that they're going to have to charge them that. Well, they've been known to pass that on to consumers before now. So, we have to look at the land base here. It's fragile, and it has to be treated with respect, and the farmers that I know, most of them do treat the land with respect. If you look after the land will look after you. That's usually what we hear, and I think that to be true. So instead of farmers competing with one another once in a while, why don't we start living with one another? And why don't we look at the real problem is the lack of cost of production. One time the farmers would meet to be able to talk, and now they sit around busy, you can't even talk to them a lot of the time. And they're working very hard, you go buy a car. Bought a new car recently, 2013 Buick Verano. Seemed to me they had a price on it. Warranty. Oh, you think you got the warranty for free? You don't. You pay for that too. So whenever you have this Land Protection Act, we in large measure, Rand Laflack was district director and spent a lot of time in the legislature, and we got it through the legislature in 1992, and I succeeded him the second time around. So we're like yourself. We're involved with it, see. And like you said, if we didn't have that clause and somebody standing up, Prince Edward Island, we wouldn't have a Lands Protection Act. So you have to stand up, or in my case, sit down. If you have to sit down and stand up. So now we got to buy our caskets. I didn't want to buy the car, buy the caskets. So now we bought the car first, and we've got to buy the caskets too. So I'd be darned if I'm going to get fried and I leave this world. I get fried enough in this life. So, no, sir. Anyway, I don't want to, I know a lot of people want to speak, so anyway, I'll just lead off by saying, or continue on by saying that you have to get your cost of production. The size is irrelevant. You have to get your cost of production. You can borrow more money, if you're a larger farmer. I think in dairy, I think there's 30, and that's supply management. And one of the leadership contenders up there west, he ran into a couple of farmers, gave her a few pointers in supply management. It's the cost of production. The farmers receive the cost of production, and you know what feed costs are like. And the tourism person here mentioned the pastoral land. Well, yes, tourists like to see the pastoral land. So if you're largely a farmer, we're going back to the landlord system. Is that where we're headed? So with that, I'll just stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, or don't move too quickly. Thank you, Urban. Pardon me?
I can't run anymore.
Well, I just want to thank you. I think one of the names that I recall from my youth was your name, and it was a pleasure to get to know your niece at Prince of Wales College, Diane Laughlin, and she became a Griffin and so forth. For a long time, I thought she was your daughter. But anyway, you have certainly been a tower of strength in the agricultural community for a long time, and you highly commend it. And thank you very much for coming. And,
Thank you very much. Thank you, people,
I
for
just
listening.
have a
Thank
couple
you.
questions if I could, but I appreciate you coming. You made some reference there about farmers working together. Okay, I'm the first member of the Carver family. We came here in 1783. We were involved in a little military skirmish south of the border, and we lost. So we came north. And there was one fellow who did a little bit of sea captain, and for the great majority of his life, he was a farmer. I'm the first non-farmer in our family. But I have two recollections as a youth growing up in the mixed family farm in Hazelbrook. One is that I was sort of perceived that sometimes farmers didn't always agree with each other, and that I wasn't sure why some of the disagreements took place. I just sort of felt that there could have been greater opportunities for some farmers working together. Second thing is that I used this example the other night in Surrey. We had about 5 acres of potatoes. We had the largest farm in Hazelbrook, 3 farms that consist of 180 acres. My father bought a new tractor. It was $4,000. He bought a combine and halves with his neighbor. It was $3,500. Those were big dollars. Some of the figures I heard in Surrey the other night almost scared me when I saw the costs involved. And Mother had a little bit of a mixed vegetable fruit operation. But Dad always sold some of his potatoes to one particular restaurant in Charlottetown. So it was a little bit of a treat to go in the truck, because you sort of hope that on the way back you might go into Garden City, and Maggie was behind the counter, and if you got an ice cream cone and she was dishing the cone, you got an extra half scoop. So you didn't have to be too smart to realize that you always let somebody else go ahead of you if they were in the other line. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with anything except to like ice cream. But anyway, my father used to go to the back door of this restaurant. And where it was, you went in an alley where the Bank of Montreal is now. You went down there, you went to the back door, and the owner of the restaurant came out and bought the potatoes. We did that for years. Then one day, my dad went to the door, and he didn't take anything out of the truck. He got back in, and we went away. So I asked my father what happened. He says, "We won't be selling any more potatoes." And I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Another farmer was here yesterday and offered to sell the potatoes to this restaurant for 25 cents less a bag than we are. So we lost the market." Now, there's something wrong with that story, besides it being true. Okay? And one of the things that I would love to have happen, Urban, I'd just love to have happen in this process, is if we could, with the next number of weeks, if there could be an opportunity that maybe some of the leaders of several of the farm organizations in this province might accept an invitation from the Lands Commissioner to have breakfast someday in Charlottetown. It wouldn't be just for the NFU, it would be for another farm organization, and if there's a third, fine dandy, just sit down, have a chat, okay? I don't necessarily expect everybody to agree, but I'd love to have that opportunity, and I'm taking this because of comments you made. I have poured through the work of the 1993 Legislative Committee, in which it's very apparent, and they made a recommendation there be here's a copy, that there be no change in limits. But it's very apparent at that point in time that there was unanimity among the farm organizations in a certain point of view. Anyway, so I just wondered if in the next 6 weeks if I was to issue an invitation to several farm organizations for breakfast or dinner, whatever the case be in Charlottetown, do you think that I'd have people respond with a yes?
As a commissioner, I would think it would be more accomplished if you had them, like the National Farmers Union, they're going to present a brief, and it'd be much better to have the one presentation rather than have a whole lot of different, like power and politics. I mean, they don't know how to debate, most of those people. And on the other hand, you need more than one for a debate, so I don't want to contradict myself, but that's not what I mean there. But I think in this particular case, you get more results and a better presentation that way. And I'm the only one in Canada. There's a moment of history here that I attended the founding convention and all 43 conventions since, now annually. The only one in Canada that's done that. So my wife helped make that happen because she's a dairy farmer. You know, the cows have to be milked every day, 7 days a week. So we did have machinery and more modern, equipment. But on the other hand, I've negotiated with Greg Donald. He's now the manager of the Data Marketing Board, and negotiated for 40 years in McCain's or not always McCain's, but Island Petroleum and places like that, and the Scales, and I dealt with 3 generations of Scales, Austin and David, and then Kent and John rather than Kent, and so but Greg Donald, we were always able to reach an agreement, and now he's general manager of the Potato Board. He's a good public relations person. I'm not getting paid for saying this, but I speak my mind, and they're in good hands as far as public relations goes and on the subject is concerned. So potato farmers should feel themselves fortunate that they have him there. And the media called me, what do you think about the sale to Irving's, from the Scales people? And I guess they were offered $65 million 10 years before they sold, and they sold for $95 million. And it just happened they were excavating the land alongside, either take it or leave it, and they wisely took it. And the media calls me, what do you think? Front page story the next day, which they showed me next time we negotiated. I said, you'd be wise to keep them on the payroll. I said, they're very tough negotiators, but they're fair. So.
Well, Urban, I respect your comments, and that's the way I'll go for now, and look forward to the National Farmers Union presentation, which I think is going to probably take place on Monday, April the 8th at the Charlottetown Hotel. A backup date for Storm is April the 15th. Those will soon be published. And once again, just thank you so much, and I hope you'll linger around tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we have younger people now who'll be taking care of that presentation, but I hope to be there. So,
disappointed if you weren't.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Well, that was a nice compliment you got there, Greg Donald. Huh? No, Greg, you don't even need to say that point. Okay. Now, I know we've had some people here tonight at other meetings, and you've spoken, and you still have an opportunity to do so, but how about someone that hasn't spoken at any meeting so far? Any comments, queries, whatever? Don't be overpowered by these politicians. I learned long ago it's all temporary. You're here for a period of time, you're gone. You never know when you're going to be gone, but when you're there, it's an opportunity to serve the people, and I've been very pleased with how respectful people have been at all these meetings. I have only had to call one person in all of these meetings so far, and he used the word lie, and I just don't think that's the terminology we need to do in those conversations. We're all in this together. I can say this, I'm not a farmer, but on Thursday or Friday night, from about 1st of May to late fall, you'll find me in some part of rural Prince Edward Island. And very much so, because I like it and love it so much. Okay. Can't believe this. pretty soon I'll have to call on Morley Wood, and I've told him that he's never home. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, my name's Dan Murphy, and I didn't really think this would be an issue here that we'd address tonight, but I guess it goes, this is something that Mr. Bell addressed, and in terms of, and I guess Mr. Gardner talked about it, I'm thinking opposing views, but anyhow, this issue of unrestricted, I guess if you want to call it that, subdivision of land in the countryside, and I guess this refers to item number 4 in your mandate, and as I say, I didn't think that this would be part of the forum tonight, but I'm glad it is. I do a bit of farming. I spent a bit of time in the Department of Agriculture, and at one time, if you had picked up the phone and called the department, chances are you might have been, or I might have been the one to pick up the phone and answer your call. Through personal experience at home on the farm, I've run into trouble with non-farming residents living in the countryside, and through my time at the Department of Agriculture, I was surprised at how many times I picked up that phone and answered a call from a non-farming resident in the countryside who had a complaint about a farmer who was, as far as I could tell, simply going about the normal course of farming business. I guess what I'm getting at is I don't believe there should be unrestricted subdivision in the countryside. I think if somebody wants, well, here's what they want. People want country living, city style. That's what I call it. So they come out to the countryside and they don't want to have manure spread around their properties. They don't want potatoes growing up to the property line, and they don't want them sprayed. And that was the one call that really stuck with me from my time in agriculture. I might as well share the story. Took the call from a lady. She said, the farmer has potatoes right up to the property line. He's spraying them. He can't do that. I said, ma'am, I'll check into it. I did. Well, sure enough, he can plant the potatoes right up to his property line. He can spray them right up to the property line. Fair enough. Turns out that the lady bought the lot from this same farmer. So I don't know who was more foolish, the guy who sold the property or the lady who bought the lot. So what I'm getting at, there's all kinds of conflict being created out in the countryside because of this unrestricted development. If all this development was to occur within an incorporated community, imagine the tax base that these communities would have. The communities of Kensington, Kincora, Rustico, Summerside even. But you know, even here in Kensington, just out the road here, out the Rink Road, you know, we've got tremendous little subdivision. And there's a farming friend of mine who's all of a sudden jammed up against a subdivision. So it's something that has to be addressed, I think. I think Mr. Gardner said that, you know, it's our retirement. Well, sure it is. But we have to be able to, or we shouldn't be able to just sell it off piecemeal. It's causing too much conflict.
Well, appreciate your comments. I agree with you. I wasn't sure that we're going to hear very much of that tonight. At several meetings, a couple of people have tried to entice me into suggesting that it's time to have some municipalities amalgamated with adjacent communities and expanded. Okay? And I have skirted that quite quickly by suggesting that there is another task force out there doing with land use planning, and I really would like those comments directed much more to that group, which is headed by John Handrahan, that started going across the province. But then also, and I am serious with that comment, Dan, but I'm also aware of the fact that governments for generations have failed to address this whole matter of zoning across the province. That is, without a doubt, probably one of the most difficult areas in this whole matter. And I don't see that as being in item 4, especially in view of the fact that this other task force is taking place. However, there is a little bit of relationship to the Lands Protection Act in this regard, is that in some of these municipalities like Stratford and perhaps Summerside, but certainly Cornwall. You have now, because of the amalgamations, it's almost 20 years ago, yes, significant farms, okay? And under the land identification rules that exist in conjunction with this, is that when farms are being transferred from one farmer to another or from an individual to their corporate entity, IRAC and Executive Council don't impose any restrictions or regulations on that because it's inside an official plan. Okay? So that discussion on what the use of it is really at the municipal level. Okay? And when some people say that this municipality should be expanded across the province, it really does have a direct impact on farmers and how the zoning would take place, without question. I guess I'm going to ask you a question, which goes back to your story about the person that had the lot, bought it from the farmer, and the farmer sold it to the person. Well, when I grew up on the farm in Hazelbrook, my dad wouldn't sell a lot to anybody. When he had the legal authority to develop the whole road, secondary road, he wouldn't sell a lot. He waited until such time as he couldn't sell a lot because of the change in the rules. And I don't know your fact situation, but I say, how many farmers want to really sell a lot to somebody? I think that they perhaps end up selling the lot because they need the money.
I would agree, and I've said this, when I've debated this situation or this issue with other people, I've said, yeah, there's certain instances where that lot was sold off because somebody was in a jam, and that was a great way at the time to raise a quick 20, 30, 40,000 bucks. Pulled them out of a pinch at that time. There's no question, there's that side to it as well. Maybe this goes back to Urban Laughlin's comment is you need the cost of production, It's maybe part of a bigger issue. But, just sticking strictly with what we're talking about here, subdividing and whatnot, it might be selfish on my part, but I'm thinking if you want to live out in the countryside in an unincorporated area, well, you had better buy your own, be obligated to buy your own buffer zone. You had better be, able to provide yourself whatever the distance is, 500 meters from your house to the field, to the adjoining, whatever the figure is. The onus, I think, shouldn't always be on the farmer. The farmers will get themselves into this trap, and they often do, and they continue to do so. I guess the other thing, and it slipped my mind, when you said that people get into a jam or a tight spot and they feel they have to sell it off, well, I guess this goes back to Mr. Gardner's comment, maybe I'm misrepresenting you, but it's also, if I heard Mr. Gardner right, it's our retirement. Well, I really don't believe that farmland should be carved up for your retirement. Maybe, again, it goes back to Urban Laughlin's comment, cost of production. You should have been able to gather up the resources or the funds over the course of your career to provide yourself for that. That's a bigger issue.
Well, it's a big issue, but all of these things ultimately get back in different roads to a couple of points, and this is not meant to be exhaustive, but farmers do need the cost of production. But doesn't it get also back to each and every one of us, what we need to do? I am old enough to remember in a room like this 40 plus years ago, you couldn't see the exit sign over there because of the blue smoke in this room.
I can remember crowds close to that in my time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And somewhere along and I think that if there's one example of what education did, it was that. Okay. But when it comes to opening our wallet and making choices about food, okay, I don't know what happens to us. Now, my wife isn't here tonight. She came to one meeting in O'Leary and made extensive notes. But all joking aside, she's a retired nursing instructor. She's originally from Nova Scotia. But She has always been concerned about the type of foods we eat and the locale in the world where they're produced. And I can tell you, she's been a leader in that in her own home for umpteen years. I like to go to Europe and enjoy history and that type of stuff. What we pay for restaurant meals in Charlottetown and Summerside is insignificant. What the food cost is in Europe. And Lucille goes so far as to say, it won't be too long until we'll be getting our food and nourishment from the pharmacists by going in and buying a pill, and then we'll find out how much we have to pay for food.
I guess I didn't want to center this around cost of production, and perhaps I shouldn't have gone down that road. But I guess, you know, maybe what I'm trying to say is that sometimes I think farmers need to be saved from themselves. You know, you do get these instances where people get into a tight financial situation. I've been there myself, and the only waterfront I own is along the brook. I mean, that's more of a liability today than an asset. So I didn't sell any of that off, no, you buy it anyhow. But, you know, it's protection from ourselves is to protect the landscape, you know, to preserve it as farming land. That's where I'm coming from. And I guess you're saying that item number 4 doesn't, and your mandate doesn't cover this. I thought perhaps it did there with the way it was being talked about.
Well, there's been various people at various meetings have encouraged me to go down that road, and I have quickly tried to divert them to the other panel that will be still doing some work.
I wasn't aware of the other commission.
Well, it was appointed before I was appointed, and they're going to be going with some public meetings in the next several months. Okay. And in fact, there's a farmer on it for sure. I think it's Mr. Webster on it, Marvin Webster.
Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, I don't want to take any more of your time, so thank you very much.
Before you go, you're not presently working in government, are you?
No.
Okay.
They sent me home.
I'm not going there.
Don't worry about that.
Okay. But one of the things that I have to deal with is red tape. Okay. And it says options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. So that deals with IRAC, it deals with government agencies and all this type of stuff. Having worked in government, having done a little bit of farming, having listened to people in the agricultural community, what are your specific suggestions of how to, quote, reduce red tape and have farmers spending more time on the land and producing food as opposed to dealing with paper and feeling as if...
Well, I wouldn't have any direct recommendations concerning red tape as it regards purchase of land or leasing of land, because, you know, when I was renting land, I never got beyond 500 acres. So it was never an issue in my time. That was my limit. That was my high point, was 500 acres of farming. So I've never encountered that particular role of red tape. So I can't comment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
My, oh my. Mr. Randall Affleck. Would you like to sit down?
No, I've been at a couple of meetings today, so I'm prepared to stand. I'm a farmer. I'm a dairy farmer in Lower Badek. Farm with my brother. We're incorporated. I see the map. We have our property identified as a corporate farm there. I'm also a member of the National Farmers Union and a national board member, although my comments right now are really more of my own, although it's all part of, and I look forward to making the presentation to you in April. The Lands Protection Act, as it is right now, I think is a very progressive piece of legislation. I hear comments from, I guess it's through the media, that it's, 40-year-old act needs to be changed and everything else. And you look around the world today, a lot of jurisdictions are actually putting in place limits on land ownership. corporate or land grabbing around the world, whether it's government of China or corporations or investor corporations with investors from New York or Toronto or wherever, doesn't make any difference, are purchasing up huge tracts of land. So I would argue that actually Prince Edward Island was 40 years ahead of its time with the legislation. And the Lands Protection Act doesn't impact me or our farm at all, but I certainly recognize that my operation is different than a lot. And a concern that I recognize right now is the size of operations, but more importantly than size is you've got these very good farms with a generation that are getting ready to retire. And it's and this is a tough issue to deal with. And my brother and I and mom and dad went through a family farm transfer here a couple of years ago, and I'd sooner spend a month in a Jamaican prison than go through it again. We live on waterfront, and the land has more value developed easily than it ever would have as agricultural land, but we all value the agricultural component. So what you have is these businesses that are the right size, and how do you make a transfer, and how do you retire and do all the normal things that people want to do. And the huge issue, and it's the number one policy issue without any easy answer, is how do you get the deed on the land from one generation to the next.
And that is one of the most important matters. It's not stated here, but it's one of the most important matters. It's a very difficult issue. Your dad's still alive, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay. And you say the act doesn't have application to you, but I've talked to farmers that the parent has passed or is in poor health. It has a tremendous impact. They've been able to work in a certain setting with so many acres, and then poor health or death comes along, and the impact is unbelievable.
It's, I don't envy the legislators of the country. I mean, we I don't mind attacking them either, but we have to determine what our objective is, provincially, but nationally, wherever. And we have a real opportunity, in terms of a very small island, a population the size of the city of Kingston. I mean, it's the best kept secret we've got going, but we have the statutory and regulatory ability to choose how we're going to manage our affairs on the island in terms of land ownership and the constitutional point that you made at the beginning of the meeting. So we need to have a vision of where we want to go. And my personal vision is that independent family farmers would have clear and clear tenure over the land, and they would have the ability to choose what seeds are planted, how it's going to be grown, and who it's going to be sold to. And in terms of the land protection and food production in our country, when you have that, in my view anyhow, when you have that those families making those choices, that's where your best security is going forward. Because there's all kinds of you can't predict the future, but those people are making the choices. Now, this is somewhat philosophical, because if you have that farm business and the young people, your daughters and your sons want to go work elsewhere, what do? You need to have that next generation coming up. Now, what concerns me the most is that there are a lot of young people that are very interested in agriculture, but the model that we're moving towards is not a model where they have tenure. It's a model where they have a management role in somebody else's business. We have seed patents on seeds now, just as God intended it. So you have all this technology, and the seeds are controlled by Monsanto or whomever, and at every stage, you don't have that ability to control. The other people are controlling that production. And the other part of the I'm sounding like a talking Eeyore here because I'm trying to describe a complex issue. And in agriculture, there's a retired agricultural economist by the name of can't think of his name right now, George Brinkman out of Guelph. Did some really interesting work recently, or a couple of years ago, on farm debt and overcapitalization in agriculture. And you take one of our major competitors in the United States, we are 4 to 10 times more at risk from an interest rate rise than the U.S. are. In Canada, we are significantly in poorer financial shape than the United States. So you have a very high capitalization to income ratio. Now this is in the not too, since 2008, grain prices and everything else have improved. But anyhow, I'm rambling now. But the core goal in the end, I think, for policymakers is we have to create the conditions and the laws around land ownership to get the deed passed to a younger generation of farmers. And we have to recognize that it's not good enough to have them managing the farm and somebody else owning it. Like market won't be able to protect the land. We have a parcel of a 20-acre field next to us, and I'm going to say 15 years ago, it came on the market for $3,000 an acre, which was fairly high at the time. Potato grower was interested, and a neighbor of ours was buying it, and that's what we thought was happening. And in the end, that person didn't purchase the land for agriculture, and it was bought by an urban professional from Halifax. They paid considerably more, and then it flipped again in another couple of years' time. It was $10,000 an acre, and so if we want to identify it and protect it for food production, for agricultural use, you can't go to the marketplace and expect to be able to do that. If we, in my concern, like the Executive Council put this commission together, and my bias is I'm concerned that the intent is to take the restrictions off the aggregate landholding, which I think is a huge, huge mistake, because we'll never win in that fight. The investor there are a lot of people in this world that have a lot of money, and the farmers in Prince Edward Island are not the ones that are in that category. And so if you take a market-based system and you take off the restrictions, you have a perfect storm of farmers wanting to retire and maximizing the value of that asset. You have young farmers with no capital, no equity, and a market that's the capitalization income ratio is so out of whack, they'll never own it. And and I guess that's my principal concern. That we think long term and what we want to do. So,
just before you go sit down, I can't dispel something that may be in your mind, but I can assure you that I never heard from any minister of the Crown or any official in government, you're to take this job and you're to get the limits increased. Because, first of all, I don't believe anybody would ask me for a whole bunch of reasons. They would deem it improper to ask, but I'm reasonably well known enough that I am extraordinarily independent, and I wouldn't undertake a challenge like that. which would be really very deceitful. At the end of the day, what I make and make a decision, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't mind saying that I have devoted an awful lot more time lying awake at night and waking up early in the morning thinking about this than I expected to, Randall. I read the Globe and Mail every day. And on February the 25th, this was an article on the front page of the Globe and Mail, and I sent it to Patrick. And anyway, it's entitled this: International billionaires are forking over tens of millions for New York's latest and ultra-high-end living as a hedge against uncertainty, and many are doing it sight unseen. And last year they had 2 condos in New York, each of them sold for $50 million. And I don't believe that we have any idea on this province. Sure, we have some wealthy families, and each of us could put down the 3 or 4 wealthy families, and everybody would put one of those, I'll have them correct, okay? Somebody mentioned one family earlier. But that's not wealth compared to what the world has, okay? And one of the strange things for me has been that this statute hasn't been challenged except once. Okay? There's a perception by a lot of people outside of Prince Edward Island that you can't buy Prince Edward Island land, okay? Now you can, okay? And in fact, a number of people have come from away and have come here and have been outstanding citizens and added to our quality and value of life. I just wish that there was a few more magical wands out there to deal with some basic things of get more money in your pockets, increase the cost of production. I'd love to know what the solution is to interest rates.
Well, for God's sake, keep them low, because that's the only thing. You know, if it rises, and it will.
Well,
We are at a huge disadvantage in this country.
in
So.
81 and 82, I paid 18% for my house mortgage for 5 years. I thought I was pretty lucky because the people that let it float were paying over 20. But one of your colleagues at one of the Western Prince meetings said, if interest rates ever go 5 to 6% higher, we're shot. In fact, they didn't make it public meeting, but afterwards they made the suggestion, and they said, it'd be great if the provincial government could borrow some of that 40-year money at low interest rate for us and give it to the lending agency. Okay? And I don't know quite how to. I feel like I'm trying to educate some people. I'm yet trying to be educated myself in all of this. Okay, it's not easy, and being a farmer these days is an unbelievably difficult task that sometimes I think is equivalent to being a gambler.
Can I make one more comment?
Absolutely.
In the dying days of the last election, the GIS government made an announcement that they were going to pursue essentially a land development banking
Yeah.
for young people, and I thought that was a particularly good idea. That, you know, there needs to be some mechanism where, you know, when it's family, it's a lot easier, of course, but but you know, where you identify you know, young farmers that want to buy it, and you know, she can go and get the land, and something like that needs to happen.
I agree.
Okay.
And I spoke to a lot of groups, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but one of the groups I was most impressed with were 10 or 12 young farmers between age 24 and 34, including a husband and wife, including a young fellow about 25 who wanted to come to Prince Edward Island so badly that he wrote his undergraduate degree when he was still in Europe, and on organic farming in Prince Edward Island. Okay. And one of the things that they were really hot about, Randall, was we want to have land banking. We can't get land, and we heard at one time there used to be a land development corporation. It served a valuable purpose in the 70s, then it took on another form. And I can tell you, incidentally, that some of the submissions I'm receiving are talking about the importance of doing something like that again. And everything that I feel and see, and I'm not supposed to disclose too many feelings in this, I think that has a good reason why it needs to have that type of vehicle present. The last question before I let you sit down, then we're going to have a whole bunch of other people talk, I'm sure you are. You talk about your beautiful scenic lands. Okay? How about we put in some policies in place that reduce your property tax for that beautiful scenic land, that you enter into some developed restrictions, that it's going to make it be a vista for a long, long time, and that maybe there even would be an opportunity for someone to give you some cash if you...
You've been to Europe.
Yeah, I have.
I mean, that's the common agricultural policy. That's how they fund a lot of projects, you know. It's, yeah.
So those things make some sense to you?
I'm not a big fan of it. And I've been blabbing on here, and I don't want to take up people's time, but can I answer your question?
Yeah, sure.
What I see from what's happening in Europe is, you know, take England for example. You know, people have the right to walk right through your farm. You know, it's a common use. I'm not sure how it's phrased legally, but you know, people trespass on the. I call it trespassing, but they on the land. It's good on environmental goods and services. Like there's merit, and there's a good case for that. But you know, the root cause of the problem is you know, the basic costs and income are not being covered. Or income provided, you know, and we need to really be trying to deal with it at that level. And part of my concern is that it's easy to make the case for a taxpayer that you're putting out tax dollars to farmers, and in return you're getting ecological goods and services. That's a logical argument, but it doesn't deal with the root cause of not having enough income from a farmer perspective. And when budgets get tight, it's the first thing, maybe not that, but it's the first thing that I feel would be cut, eh?
Okay, we can talk later.
Okay.
Hey, how's your back row doing there? The real back row. I already spoke. Mr. Gardner, you got some colleagues back there. Who else is going to say something?
But I have some experience urban Auckland again with transition of land and deeds, and I can tell you it's not an easy trip. We had one son, stillborn, and there's no successor to our farm. So grandfather's farm, another farm, small farm in Trappers Rest, another home farm in Sherbrooke. Father's farm, bought it on January 19th, 1920. Grandfather's farm over there before that. Mr. Loughlin came out from Ireland. His stats were 1775 to 1871. He lived to be 96. That's where record stood till dead broke it in 2004. 120-year-old record stood for that long. So, and then we kept our house and barn a home, and then you had to get that called like a subdivision, you know. We paid our taxes already May 29th for May 31st, and we paid them all for August 31st and November 30th. They couldn't have touched us, but they doubled our taxes after that. So I didn't say a word because we wanted the transition to go through. The business is supposed to be done September 30th. We finally finished on January 31st of this year. The legal work is not all done yet, as far as the paperwork matching everything else. We didn't much lawyer work as he did. He had a lot of experience with lawyers over the years. And so it should be done this week. So it's a painful transition, I can tell you that. But I always said let the farmers do the farming, let the processors do the processing. Well, we did sell to other farmers, like the South Shore, like Shore Lane Acres. There's two brothers and the son of one of the brothers. So I practiced what I preached. And just in closing, you know, I did some good in my life because as a woman used to see me in the news and television. She'd go up and slap my face. So I felt good about that because she was cut way down her medication after that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask us some general questions here. Not many people, in fact, no one has raised it except for myself. Item 3, legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as land holding limits as they apply to utilities. At one point in time, Iraq did not count easements. You had to have, they didn't count them. So if you had a lot along the water, and it was 4.9 acres, and it was 160, 170 feet, and you put in a husband and wife's name, that had nothing to do with it. But then they started adding and counting the roadway up to the main public road. Okay? So easements are counted in. So we have an electrical company in this province, and let's say that it is now getting to its 3,000 acre limit, in part because of these easements. You build a new business or you build a home down a particular area, and if it's quite a distance from a public road, you get an easement for the electrical company. That is counted in their land holdings. Okay? I think some people think that electrical companies are exempt from this type of situation. Okay? I raised this in Charlottetown the other night, and a representative of one organization said, well, why shouldn't it be exempted? Why should that be counted in? Okay? Executive Council put that in there because they want me to comment on it. And no one's commenting on it. So I'm raising it a little bit. So let's use the example. You have an electrical company, and it's at its limit, and somebody wants to develop more, and they need electricity. How are they going to get the electricity if there's no power here, pun intended, to make Maritime Electric be able to do that? What are your comments on that? Okay. Why don't you just come up and sit beside me?
No, thank you. No, I'm telling you now, anybody, just for the benefit of this meeting, anybody that has to, okay, they brought a fellow out of retirement, Maritime Electric. No knowledge of takes his boots off before he comes in. Wondered, no, take them off. Oh, great negotiator. He died 14 months later after we reached the deal. Oh, we're coming right up the line fence, he said. And not be done in our lifetime, another 100 feet this way. Not in our lifetime, excuse me, I lived too long. It was done the following year. And what you do, people, you have one price for the line fence. And if they're going at 100 feet, you have another special price for that. I said, legally, I'm dead man, but morally, you know, I'm right. They needed one more post. Well, by Lord, they paid for that post, I'm telling you. And a guy wire. So they can come and go when they like there, and that 100 feet is Maritime Electric. If it's not taken off the farm limit, then that's debatable, you know. But really, it's much their benefit is the farmers, because I think it's 66 feet wide. Well, the sprayer's in. I guess the potato people know more than I do about that. We used to have 6 acres of potatoes way back, and we always made some money in those days. But we didn't have those kind of sprayers now those days. So we did, have that experience. So the benefit of the people, if you have to do with Maritime Electric, you make sure you have 2 prices. If they're going to tell you not be done in your lifetime, you just have another price in case, because it is an inconvenience after that. Yeah.
But if electrical easements were not counted, then an electrical company should have well below the 3,000 acres, and that if it becomes necessary to put in a major transmission line, then there are a whole bunch of other rules, environmental and so forth, assessments I think be taken care of. It's important that some degree of reasonableness and common sense prevail here, and I just was hoping that somebody would comment on that item 3, first part of it.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else want to talk about that?
I would assume that the government would just make some type of an exemption when that time comes.
Well, having been in government, it's an awful lot easier for them to do that if somebody like this commission was to make a recommendation and encourage that to happen, so then government is not being perceived as trying to do something with the Lands Protection Act, okay? This has never been raised in any meetings. I'm the guy that always raises it. But when I do, the opinion seems to be basically what you're saying. Okay? So, anybody else or anybody disagree with that comment?
I have just a question in terms of easements.
Yes.
Something that I hadn't thought about, basically. I think in some areas of West Prince, for instance, when they were bringing the power from some of the wind farms in West Prince, that they went along the Confederation Trail in some areas. Now, would that be considered part of an easement, then, those, whatever space they have there to access?
I have a feeling we're getting right to that topic in a moment. I think the answer to it is that people that are involved in the windmills, they do have easements, and I have learned recently of some of the lines going along the Confederation Trail just the other evening. Isn't that right, Margaret?
There was no easements along the Confederation Trail except for the Slemon Park Trail, which was not part of the Confederation Trail. Okay. They had to get new easements, and they got further. They were signed after, in conversation with the people at Transportation, they were signed after the power lines went in, okay. And they're for both sides of the trail.
Okay, well, let's just leave that for a second then. But I'm not sure that I can fully answer your question in regards wind farms, but I can certainly go to like the Maritime Electric case, okay? The people that did the wind farms up west, they had to get easements or they had to buy the land in order to be able to take the unit from, the windmill. From there, normally what they did is they bought that piece of land or they took an easement and then out to a near public road, which sometimes was quite a distance. But I am not aware of anything pertaining to them about being any difficulty with their land limits or becoming close to them in the windmills. I'm not aware of any of that. It hasn't been drawn to my attention.
Another fact in terms of the transmission of that power from point A where it's generated to wherever it's shipped off island. I understand a lot of it's going off island, yet it's really an impact on PEI in terms of your vistas or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there are a number of cross-country high transmission lines that years ago went through farmland. And they have a right at any point in time to go on that farmland when they need to inspect the land or to do whatever servicing to that line they need to. And it involves a number of acres. Are those part of the easement as well that we're talking about?
What's your name?
Sally Ann Webster.
Okay. Sally, in recent times, the electrical company has been taking easements for a specific defined parcel of land, and they've had it surveyed. If you go back 40s, 50s, I don't know if it's even the 60s. What they did at that particular point in time, they took an easement over the entire legal description of the farm. So if you had a 100-acre farm and you looked at what legal description was used for the easement, you would see the entire description for the 100-acre farm, which is just a horror scene for those of us doing any work in that area. And I doubt very much if anyone at the electrical company has ever calculated the easement for that entire farm, even though that's legally what they have. They think they just have a 60-foot strip or a 100-foot strip whatsoever. But you're absolutely right that easements give people the right to do certain things, come in and all that type of stuff. That's what an easement is. One person owns, the other person has certain rights. There's no question. You decide to plant a tree on an easement, the owner, and someone has an easement over it, they can come in and cut the tree down and they can do a whole bunch of different things.
The whole point behind my question is, given the number of high transmission lines, plus the properties that they own,
Yes.
I would be surprised that they're not already over 3,000
Yeah, I don't,
acres.
I think so.
If they have the
think
right,
so.
you know, the right to trespass or whatever you want to call it, as far as the farmer's concerned.
I don't know that.
Land.
I don't know that, but yeah.
That just,
No, I
question came to mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you, Sally. Margaret?
It's Margaret McKay. I guess I partially raised this with you at the last meeting in Summerside.
Yes.
And there's only about a half a kilometre of land that belonged to Linkletter Farms that they had to buy because the first easement was there and the power lines would be too close to the other power lines. So they did have to buy, Maritime Electric had to buy a half an acre of agricultural land for that purpose. What has happened there is this was an all-new easement coming down from the wind farm in West Point, and I think it runs about 50 kilometres. Half of it's on the Confederation Trail. And I know I talked to the senior guy, I'm not going to name him here, and I had a long-term relationship with him, friendship. I've probably known him for 25 years. And he told me that those easements were taken after the power line was put in through. Now, as I said to you before, this will probably be the last time the Confederation Trail is used for easements because it was better known as the power line from hell, and it took them, they ran 3 months over in putting them in. But those were all new easements, and a lot of the farmers were not pleased because it adds dangers to their land, and that easement is equivalent to, or that power line is equivalent to 100 megawatts. Prince Edward Island uses a little over 200 megawatts, 220 on an average. I think it ran a little more around Christmas, about 225, 224, 225. So you got a really heavy power line running through there. And further to Audrey's point here, originally that power line was running up to the station at the end of the Howell Road. And the residents kicked pretty good up there, and I guess they had a few people that listened, and that's why it ended up coming down mostly through farmland and the Confederation Trail. They ended up with a wind farm up there and no way to get the power out is what happened to them. There wasn't a lot of planning done. But looking at wind farms and PEI, and I think you should be aware of this, in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, it's either 5 or 6% are power is generated by wind farms. Here in Prince Edward Island, wind farms generate 22%. So right now we're way up over the others. And wind farms are not a long-term thing. They have a lifespan of about 10 to 15 years. There are other methods of generating electricity. But from the point of view of easements, I think there should be some controls there myself. I don't know what. I know Maritime Electric owns some land. I don't know how much. But they seem to get kind of slap happy with easements. And what people forget is it's fine to put a wind farm in, but you got to get the power out. and it can mean quite extensive power lines, and it is not a thing of beauty on Prince Edward Island.
Okay, so there is wind farms, and they produce, I guess, wind that goes to electricity, and then you have the telephone companies, and you have Maritime Electric, and I'm not sure if
They're using mostly Maritime Electric power lines or power poles to run their things. Some of the telephone wires, a lot of them are buried, I understand, but I think more so now when the fiber optics is running along the power lines.
I'm trying to get a little bit of help from this group to help me with
I don't
item
know if
3.
I necessarily have a whole lot of knowledge. You might have to refer to my so-called biggest fan, Mr. Sheraton. He probably knows a little more about it than I do.
Well, one thing that's important in life is never to diminish your own abilities, okay? And
You've got to keep it interesting.
And we're going to try and keep our elected officials doing what I think is very important for them to do. Listen tonight, okay? Do you have anything else you'd like to add right now, Margaret?
No, the other thing I'd like to add is somebody made some comments about farmers and the problems with subdivisions or sprawl,
Yes.
what you call it. And I own property in subdivision in Linkletter, just outside of Summerside. And we have 2 major farmers there, and one does use manure. There are times there is a little perfume, and they use a lot of common sense. When they tend to spread the manure, it's on a cold day. Now, once in a while they get full. I think once in the 30-some years I've been there, they got full, and it did heat up after. And the subdivision down, Kernenberg's the subdivision, did get a fair perfume for a few days, but they tend to plow it under the next day after they So there is a lot of cooperation there that the farmers could do with some of these residents. So that's all I'm going to say.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Margaret. Thanks for coming out for 2 meetings. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to talk about the Maritime Electric easements, or you want to go on to something else?
Has Maritime Electric ever asked to have input into this position that you were in with the commission on the land? Have they ever asked to be part of this any way, shape, or form?
Subpoena them.
No, I
More-
just
no,
wondered
no,
how much of a concern
no.
it was to them.
The answer, as far as I know, is no, unless there's some letter floating around someplace that I'm not aware of, or Patrick hasn't seen, or so forth. If I could just take that a little bit farther, there are a number of individuals and organizations that I thought I would see during this process, and they've been absent so far. I'm hoping that they will make an appearance before this is all through. This is an opportunity to participate in. Not everybody is frequent to these meetings as you are, Morley. Others? Comments? We're going to carry on beyond 9 because I consumed some. I started later. I lost track of time. I was socializing with people before, so I think we got started late, and I took 10 minutes of your time. So we're going to carry on, perhaps 9:30, and then we'll socialize some more. You live in a most beautiful part of this province. There were 3 parts of this province that I feel I really know. Well, I guess I know where I live in Charlottetown, but I grew up in Hazelbrook. Explained that before. My mother came from Murray Harbour. She's now deceased. Her parents lived in a beautiful piece of property at the water. They never owned a car. Fishermen all their life. And the other community I know is Seaview. In 1979, my wife and I stopped in there on the way to the kickoff Conservative rally in Summerside for the 79 election, and we had been talking about buying a property, and I had some cousins in Summerside, and they lived in the Carl Murphy subdivision, And we went about an hour and a half early and got Carl out there, and we struck a deal with him and bought a lot. And we were there for 13 or 14 years. And one of the reasons we left is that our oldest child, our only daughter, was making noises that she didn't want to be there all the time, and it was hard to keep two properties up and everything like this. Well, she's married now and got 3 little kids, 4, 3, and 1. And she married someone from Saskatchewan, and they come home for a couple of weeks last summer, and they rent a cottage, and coming home a couple of weeks this summer and renting a cottage, and guess where they rent the cottage? Seaview. And I used to drive every day from the 1st of June till into September before the kids went to school, and it's just a most beautiful part of the province, something very, very special. And we're very fortunate to be in this area. We haven't had much chit-chat, to my amazement, of what I call non-resident ownership in these hearings. There's been an awful lot of discussion on land limits, fair bit of discussion on red tape, except for tonight. But any comment about non-resident ownership? We haven't had any non-residents, as far as I'm aware of, speak at any of these meetings. I guess the time of the year they're not here. But if you looked at some of these maps here and so forth. Anybody want to talk about that? Because there's something in a few minutes I want to talk about, and that's something that was raised at the Federation of Agriculture meeting. No, Mr. Gardner.
You mentioned there a while ago about farmers can buy land here or whatever. Well, in the last 10 or 15 years, I'm quite aware of a few fellows that have been approached from out-of-province farmers wanting to buy land here. When they researched it, with the politics that are here on this island, they just back away from it because of this red tape. The red tape for them to come in here and purchase land because you're incorporated. It seems that you choose to go incorporated, as Randall's aware of, you get penalized for it. If that was a private, I think if I'm right, if that was privately owned and not incorporated, Randall could have switched things over a lot easier. And I think that's where this here red tape has to disappear. As far as incorporation, I mean, incorporation is still a family farm, but it seems to get twisted in the wind a little. Family farm incorporated. Just because you're a larger, more successful farm, you seem to get labeled. So it just makes it harder for your next generation to come up and try to, as Randall mentioned, to switch from one generation to the next. But I mean, I think you're quite aware of the numbers of farmers when you did this last time, and the number of farmers today. There's quite a decrease. On our road alone, there's 10 or 11 farms disappeared. We're the only ones left. So, I mean,
I'm sorry, you're the only one left?
on that road, on our road. It's about a 6 or 7 mile road. I mean, I agree, 40 years ago, we were all better off. Everybody had a job, everybody lived in the country, everybody worked, everybody did something. But that ain't today, that's not today. I'd say in another 40 years, you're gonna see agriculture is gonna be a backseat around here. And the rest of the world is gonna catch up. They're already catching up. Our markets are dwindling every year. As far as cost of production goes, well, that's just a dog-eat-dog world. I mean, your father was undersold. That's just the way it is. As far as management, milk quota, farmers look at that as their retirement. But every year there seems to be turmoil comes around, they're scared it's going to be capped or lowered. So it just, there's always this here red tape, it seems, to do anything.
Are you incorporated? You're from?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not prying, but
We benefited from being incorporated, and that's the reason we did it.
Yeah, well, normally you do, tax-wise, and legal liability reasons are usually the two reasons why people incorporate. But when you do incorporate and you put your properties into that, then you do have to go to IRAC, and they send it to Executive Council to make the final decision about the transfer over. But those situations usually happen, just a matter of fact. There's no usually issue there, except that the lands, when they go to a corporation, are usually identified. And for agricultural purposes, there's no subdivision. But what most people don't seem to understand is that the identification restrictions can exist for as little as 11 years if the appropriate notice is given. And it's very rare that the appropriate notice is given. And I believe it's because that most farmers don't know that. And so therefore, when you go to subdivide off for your son or your brother or something like that, you have to go through a more complicated process in order to get that acre of land subdivided for building purposes.
No, it's just the politics and red tape. It all boils down to cost of production. And it's just got to decrease somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, the PI government keeps saying in the last year that we've been trying to catch up with the rest of the Maritimes, increase in registration and this and that and whatever, but I don't think that they have all this red tape across the bridge. Thank you.
Thank you. How many people in the room who own farmland feel that they have part of their farms would qualify for exemption because they're environmentally sensitive, whether the wetlands or whether the forests or whether they're steep hills or whether they're hedgerows or wetlands or things like that? How many people, if you don't mind a show of hands, how many people would feel? All right. And of that group, how many people have applied to have those areas of their farm exempted? Okay, William Cousins, John Ramsey, Mr. Gardner, Donald Cousins, and gentleman back here, and at the end. So maybe half a dozen. Okay. Those, and if you don't want to tell me now, that's fine. But those that didn't apply, what were the reasons why you didn't do that?
I guess I've only had the land not even a year, so that's the reason why I just haven't got around to it. There's enough other things going on right now between applying for increases through IRAC, front and more grants,
Okay.
that and food safety stuff, and trying to look after their crop. But it's
Absolutely.
hard to get a hold of
Sure.
everything.
And what's your name?
We're in it there.
Okay.
And I had just actually incorporated 2 years previous, which was quite an ordeal to do that 65 goal.
Aubrey and Sally, thank you very much. Really appreciate your contributions.
I'd like to stay longer, but I have a commitment.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Maybe not my husband.
Well, that's an important commitment, I can tell you that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Dan?
Well, two reasons, I guess, that I didn't go that route. One is it's a fairly small acreage. You know,
Yes.
I got a little bit of 9% slope land running down
Sure.
the brook. Not a big deal. There's things I'd like to do with it, other than cropping it, that government, as the rules are right now, won't allow me to specifically grow Christmas trees in that area, but I can't cut them.
Just go over that again.
I have some land bordering brooks, 9% land running down to brooks that I'd like to put into Christmas trees.
Yes.
I could plant the trees, I could manage them to a certain extent, but I just can't cut them. That's illegal.
Because it's in the buffer zone?
Yeah. And the second reason I wouldn't go that route is because, and I didn't go through the ALICE program, I feel it makes me a target, subject to inspection. I've had instances where not environment people, well, yes, actually environment people and Department of Agriculture people have come onto my property toured around looking for infractions. They didn't find any. And I come to find this out after the fact. So I want no part of them in that regard.
John.
Just a comment. If you weren't handy your limits, either as an individual or a corporation, there's no, with respect to the Lands Protection Act, there's no great advantage to do that. If you're getting handy your limits, obviously take that land out of there to free up a little more space. And the other side that was mentioned there is most of that land is eligible under the GALIS program, which can generate a few dollars for land that's of no use for anything else.
Randall, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, no, John's point is exactly what I was going to make. Like, for the vast majority of farmers, I don't know why they would apply for the exemption under the Land Protection Act. It's not necessary. Analysis is different. We have land identified for that on our farm, not under the Lands Protection Act, but environmentally sensitive land.
All right. Morley.
Of course, you've heard me give this explanation before as to why I didn't agree with it, and nothing's changed in that respect. But there was, in our opinion, my opinion, too many caveats involved. You had to agree to too many things. Basically, it was somebody else partially taking over control of something you own. And for that reason, as I've said before, I just would have no part of it whatsoever. Now, it may have suited some people to do it. It might have even suited our situation to a certain extent. But I wasn't prepared to bend over and say, yes, sir, I'll be a good boy at that point in time.
Okay. Karen, you came the second, you've been, well, I appreciate your contribution so much in Summerside tonight, and I'm pleased to have you, and you've been listening tonight. Is there anything you'd like to say now, or?
Only that I happened to talk to somebody from Iowa about the application process regarding taking sensitive lands out of agricultural production.
Yes.
And apparently, the forms have been streamlined somewhat compared to what they were when they first rolled out. Now, I don't know if Morley was an innocent victim of the first process or whatever, but I don't think it's as involved as it used to be. Could be wrong.
Well, that's good. I'm going to find that out very soon from Iraq. Good. Thank you, Karen. Yes, sir.
We have some sensitive land at home.
Your name?
Abe on the glass. We have some sensitive land at home that I've always been on, that we look after it ourselves. We're not great on government participation in anything. Kind of independent that way. And we just take it out of production and
Okay.
leave it on.
There.
And another reason, because of what Dan said, we don't need.
I think that's Morley Wood's hand.
I would like to take a few minutes, Horace, if you would get me the time.
Sure.
There's been very little discussion here tonight.
Would you like to sit down, Morley?
No, it's fine. Might go to sleep. Very little discussion here tonight in reference to the Act itself, in reference to land holdings, and there's been very little discussion in reference to Iraq. And I'm one of the fellows, if you heard at the meeting in Summerside, I'm going to repeat myself to a certain extent, but a lot of people haven't heard that. Maybe there's somebody else in the same situation, I don't know. Anyway, our farm is, I'm the 5th generation, Greg and Jeff are the 6th, and the grandchildren are the 7th. We've been there a long time. And I hope we can stay there longer, but time will tell. Back 20-some odd years ago when Father died, he had a block of ground, that became mine, and I was the only son. So that was fine. As we were doing the legal business of that turning over, Iraq informed us that I had too much land. I think if I got it right, that they were grandfathering that in for a period of time, whether it was 1.5 or 2 years, I forget exactly. But it does take a little time to turn things around when somebody like that slips away. And so after a while, all of a sudden, the grandfather clause apparently ended, which I wasn't really paying a whole lot of attention to be honest with you. I'll stop there for a second. The block of land that father had, it was a 1,000-acre block that came over to me, and there was only 650 acres of it arable. In other words, 650 acres that we could farm. So that meant that there were 350 acres of it that was woodland, but yet it was counted as total land holdings. And for us, that was really a cumbersome situation because we, unfortunately, are in an area where there's a vast amount of woods. So anyway, letter comes from Iraq. I'll make it as short as possible.
That's fine.
And Mr. Wood, you have 250 acres of land that you have to get rid of. And I said there must be some way of working around this, so I picked up the phone, had a discussion with a certain individual, and there was no way around it. I had a certain period of time to do that, or they were going to charge me. So here I am, 2 teenage sons, both in school, wanting to farm, me trying to run the thing till I get a little older, and Iraq telling me that I got to get rid of 250 acres of ground. Needless to say, the relationship between Iraq and ourselves did not go uphill at that point in time. So anyway, that's where we found ourselves. Over the years, since then, we've had different bouts over different issues, land purchases and stuff like that. If the family at that point in time, some of them fairly young, hadn't been willing to take the responsibility of land holdings on, they probably would have had to get rid of that land, which would have had a detrimental effect on the growth of that particular operation at that particular time. So then, as time goes by, we start to rent and lease more land. And then all of a sudden, Iraq says, you have to, if you're going to rent land in, you got to rent land out. Well, how are you going to do that? And I guess my argument was, what has renting land or leasing land got to do with owning land? What are you trying to control? Because you're not controlling land ownership, because the guy with the deed is the guy with the land, who owns the land. So anyway, again, it was falling on deaf ears. So I said, there's got to be a reason somewhere along the way. So I requested a meeting with my MLA and the Premier, because the Premier had given indication to me a few years earlier that if he had become Premier, was to become Premier, that he would visit this situation. He seemed to understand the issues that I had with it. So a meeting took place, and the Premier apparently had a very different train of thought at that meeting than he had prior to him being nominated as leader of the Liberal Party. So that very much disappointed me, because I thought that perhaps there would be possibility to reason. So all over the years, with Iraq, the Land Protection Act, we've run into nothing but trouble all the way. Now, we did not incorporate. I guess that was my fault. We probably should have done that. I just didn't feel that I should have to cooperate for the reason of owning land or whatever. So we did not incorporate. So here we are. Government's still telling us, if you rent land, you got to do rent it out. If you lease it in, you got to lease it out. Rent it in, you got to rent it out. Reporting: if you own over 750 acres, I think, you have to report. What? Why should I have to report? Well, that's a requirement of Iraq. So another requirement. So red tape, man, she's plastered bright red. And I personally have absolutely no faith left in the Land Protection Act the way it is. I've got less faith in Iraq and the way that system operates. This whole process that you're involved with, which was instigated by the government, I'm going to try and be a little positive here now for a minute. I really feel as though the government sees that there is reasons to perhaps make changes in the Act, because the Act is 30-some years old and things are changing. Different people have mentioned here tonight various things, and growth of operations is one. And if we decide to bury our head in the sand on PEI and not attempt to grow as we can, and each individual and each operation will grow differently given their abilities to do so. If we do not seize the opportunity to do that, then somebody said at a meeting in Summerside, if you stand still long enough, somebody shoot you. And whether that's right or not, I don't know. So anyway, and you, sir, as a commissioner, I think the government made a wise decision, and we look forward to some good things coming from this. But it's unfortunate that so much aggravation and so much pain had to take place before we got to where we are today. And I'm sure hoping that something can change here. Some people at some of the meetings are awful concerned that it's going to be wide open. The intent is not to make it wide open. The intent is to change the acreage limit. The intent is to remove the woodland and the sensitive land and all that stuff that we've grown to disrespect. If that is removed from our holdings, we can again go back to respecting that woodland as we perhaps should be and be able to farm. Because the way things are now, we still have hundreds and hundreds of acres of woods. We've cut some down, we've regrown, we've cleared some, and we've replanted some. The fact is, our forefathers, our forefathers weren't very stupid. They had cleared the majority of the land that was worth clearing. Now, there's some left there we can clear, but it's nothing compared to what is there. So there we are still held ransom with large acreages of woodland counted in our total land holdings. Okay. So I'm looking forward to hopefully them changes taking place. And if them kind of changes take place, I think it'll be a major step forward for those of us that are still trying to farm. I don't think it'll have any detrimental effect on PEI as far as our pristine things and stuff like that. The better a farm operates and the more comfortable it operates financially, the better place to go and look.
Okay. I want to ask you some questions.
Sure, far away.
Thank you. When you're awaiting the report, just keep your expectations reasonably level, okay? You know?
I'm a very optimistic person, or I wouldn't be where I'm at. I wouldn't be farming today. So okay. I'm optimistic on this as well.
Okay. I'm not trying to pry, but I want to just find one fact from you, and then I want to ask you some specific questions on what you say. You have two sons in the farming operation with you.
That's right, and my wife.
Sure.
Better not let her out. I better not discount her. She's doing an awful lot of
Well,
book
one of
work.
these nights you're going to bring her to the meeting.
You could not get her here if you tried.
Okay.
Yep.
But you're not incorporated. Do you own all the land yourself?
No.
You have it shared in some regards with your
It's been
sons?
21, pretty near 22 years since I've been able to buy land.
Okay.
I'm a fifth-generation farmer. Can't buy an acre of land. I've said this to you in Summerside.
Yep.
There's a group of people on the eastern end of the island, and I don't know where else they are, who come here and buy acres by the wholesale. And here I am, and we have been farming for 200 years pretty near, and I can't buy an acre of ground. That's true.
Okay, now, leasing in and leasing out, okay, they call it double counting, right?
Yes.
And some people have a difficulty understanding the logic of that. And you say that the person who owns the land really controls land even if they lease it to somebody else. But the way the law works is the person who is the... If I own the land, Morley, and I lease it to you, then you, in fact, own and you control that land. I may own it, but you control it, okay? So under the present law, you have to count that, the land that you lease in. And at one time, you were able to deduct the land that you lease out, but you haven't been able to do that for the past, 14, 15 years. Would you support the concept of being able to deduct off of your land holdings the lands that you lease out to somebody else?
I don't agree with leasing land out in the first place.
Okay.
So if I don't agree with that, I don't agree with I don't agree with the policy and the laws that requires if I rent land from you, Harth, and then you were saying that I control it. I control it at your will. I don't control it if I abuse it or farm it in a way that you do not prefer.
So
Excuse me, but you are the owner of the land.
Yeah, that's true.
That part of the act is horrendously wrong, because I may rent your land, but I don't own it. So the act has got to do with ownership.
No, it actually doesn't. It has to do with land holdings, and land holdings are defined to include leased lands as well. So maybe I misunderstood. So you're saying that when it comes to you leasing my land, or you leasing the land that you have to somebody else, that shouldn't have a thing to do with the act at all?
Not as far as land ownership goes.
Okay, it's just a matter of the title, the person who owns the land. That's what you're saying, is it?
Yes, and I'd just like to add a little bit to that. If I rent land from John Doe, perhaps for 5 years, and if I build my program around that landowner, that particular block of land, as that been part of my land that I farm, I can never be assured that that block of land is there. Therefore, I do not control it. I just use it at your will until such time as...
Okay. Thank you. I understand your point of view on the leasing, maybe for the first time. Thank you. I understand your point of view. Anyone else on this leasing out and leasing in? Anyone else?
I would just like to add, I think Maureen covered a lot of the nuances, but
yes.
The particular thing about permission to rent land is something that didn't come up. That's particularly awkward. As he said, you can't be sure that you're going to get this land in a given spring. And that requirement to gain permission, I think, is...
From IRAC, the global...
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Thanks, Bertha. Somebody else on the leasing out. If the leasing out provision was changed so that could be deducted, does that help anybody in the room?
That should definitely be a consideration. Tax from her acreage, of course, eh? The way it is now, it doesn't, you lease in land and you lease it land, the land doesn't help counteract the increase in acreage.
So William Cousins, if the rule was changed going back, say, pre-1995 or 1996, to where you have to count the leased in land, but you're able to deduct the leased out land, that would be helpful?
That would be helpful, sure.
All right. The gentleman behind you.
I was just going to say that I agree with Morley and William. The land that we lease should not be included in our landholding.
Okay.
And you talk about red tape. IRAC's a good place to start, because it's a major hurdle. It's very frustrating and very slow to deal with.
John Ramsey?
Just a comment too, I guess I'm thinking of red tape and I'm thinking of some of the comments that were made, Morley for sure, that do we need to, with respect to land ownership on Prince Edward Island, need to be even considering the leased in land, and then the leased out portion would alleviate things somewhat, but let's throw the leased in and leased out land right out of there and have land ownership under the control of IRAC, and that would be at least maybe it would be a concession from growers that would make it a whole lot easier to know exactly what we've got to deal with. And the other thing, and Bertha mentioned it, is the global gizmo there that gets people's names in the paper through the summer that they went and rented a field from a farmer, and they didn't apply to IRAC to get that because it, for a certain few days or a few months, it could have put them over their limit, and IRAC wants to know about that. Like, if you have so many acres, as Marty said, you have a disclaimer every year that you submit all your land ownership. That should work. That should work.
Well, just wait until the phone call is over. Randall?
Well, I understand that there are people that think the aggregate landholding should be raised. But, I mean, that's the purpose of the leased in and leased out and the double counting is to protect that upper limit. You know, so we need to determine what the limit is. Because you can have, you know, an individual can own 1,000 acres. And if you don't lease in and lease out, then you can also, you know, you can lease out your 1,000 acres and, you know, effectively you have control of 2,000. So your limit is now 2,000. You know, you know, and so the, you know, as a community, we've got to decide what the number's going to be.
Okay, let's just go over a couple of the statements there you just made before. You said you're talking about an unincorporated individual, aren't you? 1,000.
Yeah, 1,000. Either way, you know, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're the number is higher.
Okay, so Patrick has 1,000 acres. Okay, and he leases in 500 acres, and then he leases out 500 acres. So he has to count the leasing in, but why shouldn't he be able to deduct the leasing out?
Because the control over the extra land that he's leasing in, it puts him over that limit. You effectively control more land. You know, Wally makes good points. You can't be sure of that from year to year, but essentially you have control over that production. More so than the limit. So I mean, you have to be clear.
No, that's right.
What the number is.
No, I should have used a lower figure than 1,000 acres in my example. But this is the first meeting that I recall where there's been a point of view that the leasing in shouldn't be counted at all, and the leasing out, just the whole leasing stuff is gone. Morley, you're not making this job any easier.
I'll just make a comment. Randall made a statement there a minute ago, and I sort of liked what he said. And it's referring to leasing in and leasing out. And
why don't you use the mic, please?
He basically said that it was control of production, if I'm reading you right. So, and it goes back to what I said earlier. What is the idea of IRAC's position in leasing in, leasing out? Is it to control production? If it's to control production, then the Act needs to be changed. Because the Act is designed to control land ownership. But yet when we get into this here, renting in and renting out, leasing in and leasing out, which I totally disagree with entirely. Neither one should be happening. I should be able to rent what...
I actually picked that up.
Oh. I'm glad you were listening. No, but all jokes aside, seriously, what are they trying to do with the Act in reference to the leasing? Are they trying to control production by not allowing any of us to have over a certain amount? If it's production they're trying to control, why in the dickens don't they say so? Why is it included in the acreage limits? So I just want to comment, and Randall just brought the production side up.
Thank you. I get, just 1 second, perhaps, Urban, I'll come back to you. IRAC didn't bring the law forth. In fact, IRAC didn't even exist in 1982. It was something called the Land Use Commission. And people have done various things over the years, and the governments have, given them authority to deal with utility rates and sewer rates and a whole bunch of other things, and it's gotten quite whatever. It was the legislature that brought in the statute in response to public representations. Because I know enough about politics to know, especially in those days, that government wasn't going out to try and upset something. What they were trying to do was take a little bit of a long-term vision in land in this particular province, led by a premier who regarded the land as absolutely essential for the long-term future of this province. And it just so happened at the time that a premier occupied the position when some whole bunch of discussion took place on vertical integration and so forth. All right. The reason why, folks, leasing was so important because it was so simple to get around the ownership matter of lands protection if it just dealt with who owned the land. That's the way leasing was dealt with. Unfortunately, over the years, I say unfortunately, that we've got to the point in some aspects that some of the administration has been cumbersome by a lot of people. We've got now the easement and dealing with maritime electric and a whole bunch of things. And so there really hasn't been a thorough examination of some of this matter. But in many ways, a lot of this has to do is what I understand. We live in a society in which people have the right to own property up to a certain amount, 1,000 acres. But what's good for the land? You know, this question was asked in O'Leary. The first question was asked, this gentleman says, like, what is good for the land? We haven't talked about crop rotation at all tonight, but we're going to talk about it, whether it's formally or informally, because I think that is becoming a very important part of this whole discussion of crop rotation. If there's one thing that I'm learning an awful lot about this island. But there's one thing that I'm learning an awful lot more about is crop rotation and the different aspects of what a crop will do with another piece of land and all this type of stuff. And I am absolutely, at least the individuals that are coming to this meeting, I am impressed beyond belief with your candor and your honesty about land. You don't all agree in different points of view. And I'll say this, Morley, is yes, I know that some people hold a point of view that you do and someone else has a different point of view and so forth. But you know, the point of view that this Land Protection Act is perfect and that it needs no changes whatsoever is a point of view that's a little hard to advance. I hear some people use the phrase, I don't want the Lands Protection Act touched at all, as if it was the Ten Commandments. Well, I'm just a human being. I'm certainly not Moses. I'm not out to rewrite the Ten Commandments. But you know, guys, I have a day job, and I have known for years where it's possible to weave in with one word and weave out with a different section, and I could lay out a platform here in front of you that if you gave me enough money, I'm not talking about a fee, but if we had $100 or $200 million made available, and they came to my office and said, Carver, here's $200 million. We want you to go out and buy as much land as you can possibly do, and you give us a memo and set out what we have to do. I can do that with this existing piece of legislation, and there will not be one single application go to IRAC, and they'll never hit Executive Council. I just need to move a few people into the University of Prince Edward Island and have them start school between the 1st of September and the end of June, go home for holidays, and come back next year. Okay? And one of the things that has amazed me about this legislation is really, I know that some people are upset by it. Look, I'm telling you, I know that. I know the intensity of the feelings. I just wish I could bring a few of you guys that hold one point of view and another point of view a little bit closer, because we're all in it together. We really are. I mean, I'm the only son in my family of 5 sons, now 4, who live here. I don't own any land, but I am committed to this, or I wouldn't have been doing some things I did in public life, and I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing for the last few months and a few more months. But, folks, if you think you're upset about certain parts of how this stuff has been applied by IRAC, in other words, I can create a fact situation that you'll just go bananas. You'll be at this guy's door, pounding down his door to pass emergency legislation that's retroactive to overturn deeds. And one of the reasons we have been able not to have to get to that situation is because, quite frankly, a lot of people in the rest of the world haven't quite figured that out. And there's a part of me gets nervous that I don't want to say too much in case somebody listens to some of my thoughts. Okay? And it does get down to, and if you think your top dollar is going to be able to compete against the top dollars in New York or the billionaires in China or Central Europe, give your head a shake. It ain't going to happen. But we have got farmers out there struggling. They've got large operations. They've got deaths in their family. They have parents dying or getting dementia. And how do they become small if somebody wants them to be small? I want you all to succeed. And I would like to get a greater degree of harmony in the agricultural community in this province than I think sometimes presently exists. And I would love you to make my job an opportunity that I would be able to say, I have strong support in this particular regard, in this particular regard. Some people think that this Lands Protection Act is not going to exist after my report. Well, I can't tell you what these guys in cabinet are going to do with it, men and women, but I'll be absolutely positively shocked if anybody is so far off the mark that they intend to abolish that statute. Okay? This act was put in place to protect the land, and that means the inhabitants of this province as well. And I want to produce suggestions to reduce red tape, to make your job easier. I wish I could, with a magical wand, put more money in your pocket. The only thing I can do is tell you that I feel for you and that I have 95 to 98% of all my clients come outside Charlottetown. If I relied on people in Charlottetown, I would starve. Okay? We didn't get to where we are in this agricultural community all overnight, and we can't solve everything all overnight, but I intend to make a fair number of specific suggestions, some of which the ministers may like and some of which they won't. But I am hoping that as a result of this process, the people who are here tonight and elsewhere are going to say, at least we had an opportunity. To voice our opinions, and that it's been a helpful process. Because the task, I don't mind telling you, has turned out to be much more difficult than even I thought. However, I'm optimistic too. And the night is young. Maybe I'll get some brain waves now that you're going to give me, or you're going to take one of my calling cards and send me an email and suggestions. I'll come to you, Urban, in a second. And I don't know how a man with your point of view was ever given a name like Urban. And I shouldn't criticize that because I was given two handles from both my grandfathers, Horace Boswell, okay? But I would really hope that you would make written comments available to you. Nothing is too small, please. Nothing is too small. If it's affected you in a way, let me know. Send me, let me know. But please try. One of the things I try to do in my job is I try to bring people together. And I try in my cases and in situations with them to try to envision myself on the other side of the table. You know, if you have a fact situation that this law doesn't mean a thing to you because you're so far within the limits, okay? But what about your neighbor who is struggling? He's got himself in a situation, he's so large and it's hard to get small. You know, what can we do to help in that situation? Help me with identification. Help me with IRAC and all these types of things. Because at the end of the day, I intend to address these. And if you make your points of view known to me, it makes it easier for me to convey those points of view elsewhere. I apologize for having spoken too long. I guess it's turned into a little bit of a monologue, but as somebody once said in the legislature when I was there, I was sort of moved because I felt a few comments coming on. Okay? And Urban, pardon me?
Probably everybody will leave, but I'm trying to help Morley.
No, nobody is going to leave.
I'm trying to help Morley in the house in the debate. I like that. That's a good debate. I'd like Morley and I to go in a debate sometime. resolved that.
Maybe
Then you
we'll arrange
play
that.
that out, and we'll darn well get a crowd.
Perhaps it can be at breakfast.
Anyway, okay. Now, we haven't touched the Lands Protection Act for 30 years. No, excuse me, we have.
No.
We have, no, yes. No, here we had a Supreme Court judge, wasn't he? They brought in a report, what was it, 2009. What he said was, non-arable land doesn't count. We sold our farms, non-arable land didn't count. Well, excuse me, that non-arable land helps protect the rest of the land. What does the breathing? What about the trees? What about the marshes? It protects the other land. So that was one hit we took in the Lands Protection Act. But what that means is the 1,000 acres is now up to 1,400 acres that way. The 3,000 acres is up to 4,200 acres now. So we already got an increase in the Lands Protection Act. And I rented land, we rented land. Mary and I rented land to Sturt Affleck for 7 or 11 years. And he looked after the lime, he looked after the crop rotation, crop scouts, he had the whole thing. So what you do, you just lease the land for 6 years. At least you'll have two 3-year rotations. And guess what? When Kenny McClellan, his brother and his son, when they decided they wanted to buy some land, and a fellow came and sat in the chair, before the other business was done, he wanted land. You're getting tired renting, he said. Well, we call it renting rather than leasing. It's pretty the same thing. So I guess we got the land, the fellow who's renting it last. So you protect the land. We don't own the land. We're stewards of the land. You get my age and your time for you to change your farm to somebody else. You'll find out how much land you own. You own it, yes, but if you're leasing that land, you in fact own that land for that time period. I don't know. They tell me what they're putting in, but I don't know. I haven't got control of what they do, but if they don't do it right, I know darn well if they're good farmers or not very quickly, and I already watched them before that, so I'm just trying to be helpful here. So
I think everybody has been helpful,
yeah,
Urban.
I agree with that.
No, I appreciate that.
And I recognize the politics of these guys who are coming in late. That's smart. In the debate, sometimes you listen to the ones who talk last, myself not included probably. But in debate, I always like to enter. The last debate we had is resolved that voluntary charity should be discontinued and replaced with contributions from general taxes. We're on the negative side. Ontario took us on. Oh, they said, if a neighbour's barn burns, by all means, you help them. Therefore, the opposition agrees that it should not be, that the land should not be, the taxes, they should not be, so they agreed with us, in other words. So, resolved, and then we had another one, voluntary charity should be discontinued. That's the one, replaced by general taxes. Remember they closed the House and the Masterton government? They're out $1 million in the tax rental field, remember? Do you remember that? But that was great for us because I got a few smiles out of that one too. So we won that in unanimous decision. So I like a good debate. Thank Marley very much for your presentation. Marley?
Well, actually, quite truthfully, I don't remember the Matheson government. I just remember the Shaw government defeated it, but that's the only part I remembered about it, even though a distant relation of mine, J. Walter Jones, was of the other party. My family were of the point of view they were thankful he was in a different district, because if he ran in our district, they'd have to vote for him, not because he was a relation, but because he was a farmer's premier. Now, I know it was a little slow getting the meeting off, but we seem to have done awfully well in the last half an hour or so. How about crop rotation? Where does John?
Get into a debate with Mr. McLaughlin, but let's just be sure that 1,000 acres only goes to 1,400 if you have 400 acres of sensitive land that you can take out.
No, that's right. And the recommendation of the Thompson report was not followed. The recommendation of the Thompson report, Judge Thompson, was that it was only dealing with arable land, right? And that wasn't done. It was the regulation put in for the 40% and so forth. I think there's a fair bit of misunderstanding in the community about the whole of that, so forth. And yes, it does. It's, I guess, one of my little surprises in this that so few people have applied for the exemption, but I understand the reasons why. And also a little bit of surprise that the leasing out is the if that was to happen, that could be changed. That doesn't seem to be gaining as popular support as I want or thought. So, John?
You seem to support the leasing out, leasing in and leasing out?
No, I don't support anything. I'm just trying to ask questions to get your opinions. Don't take, except for landscape and something else I said earlier. That's the only thing you can predict of what's going to be in the port.
We'll get you to slip up sooner or later. So.
Pardon me?
We'll get you to slip up sooner or later.
If you keep me here long enough, you might.
Just on the leasing in and leasing out, I mean, the leasing in part without the leasing out is a restriction. But once you put in the leasing in and the leasing out, doesn't that open it up wide open? Could I not theoretically rent 10,000 acres in and lease 10,000 acres out, as long as I was within my personal 1,000-acre limit?
That, I believe, was one of the reasons why the government of the day in the mid-90s did what it did, because they thought that that was capable of abuse. I wasn't involved in politics at the time, and I'm not sure what the true reason was. I'm led to believe that that was what you just said is one of the main reasons. And the other reason, I believe, is they were concerned that if you deducted leasing out, that it provided opportunity for sham leases, of where you got everybody, whatever, and whether it's an employee or whatever, that's truly controlled. And somewhere along the line, people who are dealing with this, not the people in Charlottetown, but somewhere along the line, people have got to say is that what is it we're trying to achieve here in this island with our lands? Are we trying to concert this or concert that? I don't know. Vamp this or loophole that, whatever the case be. I don't know. But I guess I am just a little bit surprised that some people are so strong that they want a massive change in this legislation. Well, one fellow told me the other day, there'll never be another government that'll appoint a commission in the next 30 years to open this up, so we have to get as much as we can get right now. I think the person forgot who they were talking to. I mean, there have been a fair number of changes made over a period of time, but to repeat myself, one of my chief concerns is that some people who are opposed to raising any limits seem to, in their reasoning, be strongly in favor of the existing legislation, and there are certain things in that existing legislation that nobody example uses, and they can be abused beyond belief, and can be used beyond belief. Anyway.
Can I just make a...
I'm going to hold you there. I'm going to hold you and Urban together for a second. Bertha?
I'll just make another comment. I've heard you throw this invitation for a breakfast out a few times, and I think it's a good idea. I just want to put that on the record. I never responded in previous meetings.
No, I know.
I do think open dialogue breaks down a lot of barriers and communication. And I really liked your comment about, if you're so far from being impacted by this act, you just don't want anything done about it. And your very wise comment about we need to think about our neighbors. And to me, what resonated when you said that is we are one large mixed farm. We've made that case before to people at the beef plant, various people that need to know the integration. And I go back to the gentleman, Danny McKinnon, the fairly small dairy farmer that spoke when we were down in Montague.
Yes.
And spoke very eloquently about how he relied on potato farmers and when he needed more hay land. And so that's a big part of the give and take. So I guess my point is, if people really aren't impacted, it is important to look at the neighborhood and at the community and at the others who are, because we're all,
Sure.
we are one large mixed farm.
Thank you, Bertha. In 1982, for all intents and purposes, there was only one group that was impacted by the legislation that was put in place. Okay? And the figure, I won't go so far as to say it was taken out of the air, but it was set reasonably high. Okay? And there are many a times I wish I had my old friend back to talk to him, Angus MacLean, at this particular point of view. I voiced that to a friend of mine the other day. And I guess I've tossed this question out before, and I'm going to probably conclude with this, is that I just don't understand why Horace Carver, a Charlottetown lawyer, needs to own 1,000 acres needs to have the right to own 1,000 acres of land in this province if I am not involved in the agricultural community or my lands aren't being used in agriculture. I just have a bit of a problem with that. And why am I saying that? Well, if I have the right to own 1,000 acres of land, and I'm not a farmer, and I am not having my lands used in the agricultural industry, and since we believe in a society in which the rule of law exists and equality exists, that means everybody else in Charlottetown has the right to do that. Okay? Could I get, well, I feel I have a rather contented life by owning no land. My wife owns half an acre and her house is on it in Charlottetown. Would I be able to get along in life with owning 500 acres of land in this province? Okay? And I have tossed that out at half a dozen meetings, and I'm absolutely staggered that it doesn't get any uptake. But anyway, hope.
In the market for some?
What did he say? No, I'm not going to get any uptake, and Morley, you've been it's nice to have you here again. Urban, it's always a pleasure to know that there apparently is no age restriction on people who are interested in this province.
For potato farmers at harvest time, the grain farmers at harvest time, and the dairy farmers when they pay down, even though it's different than it used to be in the bad weather. So I'm still suffering from that, even though I shouldn't be.
Yeah.
But it's just in you, it just leave you.
I don't know what you folks expected tonight. I didn't know what I expected tonight. I just, if I've missed points or whatever, I do want to hit on one point that John Ramsey said, except for one or two very specific things of landscape and support for land banking. Any questions or comments I've made tonight, you haven't any idea what I think about the issues. My goal has been to draw out from you. Okay, great group, large turnout. It was a little slow getting off the ground a little bit, but that's all fine. I am going to stay around until the last one of you decide to leave. And if there's still a few for kicking around here, and I've already spoken to you, yes, I will leave. And I just very proud to be associated with this group of Islanders, and I just wish the task was a little easier, and I wish I had a few greater options of dispensing some of the cash treasury and things like that, but we'll try and do the best we can. I don't know if anybody heard that or not, but anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming. You're a great group, and thank you.